All I need is a sheet of paper and something to write with, and then I can turn the world upside down. Friedrich Nietzsche.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Holt.
And I'm Lee Esses. Today we are talking about rebranding words and redefining words in your story in order to convey certain information. I've been watching Person of Interest lately, and the words relevant and irrelevant mean something very specific in the context of this story that it wouldn't in, say, Lee's book that she published most recently. The use of these particular words change how we see the moment and their definition just within the story. And that is advanced craftsmanship in the writing world, and about as advanced as we'll get on the podcast. But I do think it fits in well with this month's theme of the context and what happens besides just the word choice that can really make your story have an impact.
This is something, if you want to do, and we encourage you to try it out, you do need to be cognizant of what those words mean in the first place and be very deliberate and careful in which words you are choosing, how you go about the rebranding, and making something very specific to your story. It's actually kind of simple if you think about it. It all relates to footholds. Like we talked about in last episode, putting the footholds in for how you want to reframe these words will add weight to something that may, at the beginning, have seemed fairly ordinary.
I've mentioned in previous episodes that one of my favorite lines in literature was, "Get the potato peeler." This is as ordinary of a line on the surface level as you can get. But the villain, prior to this particular scene, had threatened to use a potato peeler on a little girl. He was a bad person, and we know that, and the main character went and pursued the bad guy anyway. So when the bad guy says this, we know exactly what that means because potato peeler specifically has context and doom attached to it. It's not just he's being scary.
You will see this idea, this rebranding of words, used most often in dialogue between characters, because it's easier to build that association between characters, like an inside joke almost between them about what something is, what it'll mean. So one person may be trying to comfort another character by saying, think of it like blank. And then when it comes back up, all they have to say is blank. And the previous conversation comes to mind, and it helps resolve a lot of things without having to spend a lot of words on it or end up repeating yourself.
This can happen between your main character, your point of view character, and your reader as well. But more often than not, you'll see this as one character branding the word and then the other character bringing it up later. So the crime boss suggests that if the cop pursues him, they might have a little accident on the road. And then later, this person who pursued them anyway dies in what's ruled as a car accident. We know it wasn't actually an accident. So every time we see the word accident for the rest of the story, accident becomes murdered by a mob boss.
Part of the reason why you do need to be aware of stuff like this is because if you then use accident in an unrelated way, it's going to trigger that reader brain to be like, ooh, is this important? And then it plays no part in it. And because you're often taking common or ordinary words and putting a more precise mood to it, it can be easy to misuse it later if you're not careful.
This can also happen if you are repeating dialogue. It can be very easy to add a vaguely ominous undertone to it, so you're adding just a bit of a threat. Every time the Joker says, "You want to know how I got these scars," we know he's also threatening to give someone else scars. So anytime that phrase is used, it's been rebranded for this particular character.
Another way to use it is to call back to certain events that you set up in the beginning. Again, this is the footholds idea, where just mentioning a single thing will make a big difference. I think one of the best uses I've seen of this is in The Way of Kings, when King Elokar mentions that he is seeing strange figures in the mirrors and behind him. It might have been words of radiance. But that mention really doesn't stand out until you put it together with a different character's own experiences.
And the last way you can do this with your writing and talking between your main character and your reader is to take something normal and add a supernatural or fantasy element to it. So if we say his skin sparkled in the context of the detective just managed to interview a stripper at the strip joint, then we can assume he got glitter on him while he was there. If we say his skin sparkled and we know he's a vampire, Twilight has rebranded sparkling skin to be this person is supernatural in some way.
Sometimes the rebranding can help if you are trying to use a word that not everyone is already using. This can help or hurt depending on how well you do it. If you look at something like The Walking Dead, they rebranded zombies as walkers. 1, it lines up better with the name of the show, and 2, it takes away a lot of the predetermined ideas that people have of zombies and what they are and what they do, and allows them to have a new word and create their own context without having any previous bias.
In my current work in progress, I'm actually doing this as a character choice. So I have 2 different points of view. One has the world context that all of the readers do of knowing what a vampire is, knowing who Dracula was and Bram Stoker and all of this lore that the world understands. And then this other character who's been isolated from society her entire life. So she doesn't know what this word is. She's never heard the word vampire. So she's replacing it with elder because these people are way older than even the oldest people in her village. So I'm using the word vampire very specifically as far as which character is using it. But the word elder now is rewritten to mean vampire because it means that in both contexts. But I am not using vampire in one particular point of view because that's not how she sees the world.
So there are a lot of really good uses and a lot of really good reasons for you to rebrand words within your story, to create your own context, to create your own meanings behind otherwise innocuous phrases. But how you do that is key in making sure you're conveying the right ideas and the right messages to your readers without allowing them to add their own previous bias and own previous understanding to that word or phrase. Because if you don't do it right, it's just going to create more confusion.
And I think some of this has to do with how much the rest of the world has context for this particular word. You can't have it be too unique because then you won't be rebranding it at all.
Overall, you want to find a good balance between too unique and too common, but there are other ways that you can help rebrand words. If you take a look at Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, he rebranded push and pull very specifically as part of his magic system. Either you're pushing or pulling on emotions, or you're pushing or pulling on metals, or whatever it is. So in Mistborn, to differentiate between normal, like pushing open a door, and pushing open a door, he capitalizes any reference that is for specifically the magic system. And so that's something that you can take into consideration, punctuation and formatting, to help you rebrand specific words to your use.
And the last way you can rebrand words is through puns and humor. This is a way to draw connections between words even without the rebranding. But if you give a specific push-pull branding with the magic system, and then you say, hey, would you like a push pop? Then it can mean something very different because of the magic system surrounding it. Obviously, they don't have push pops in Mistborn, but you get my point.
I could see them existing at least in Era 2, if not Era 3, whenever that happens.
Yeah. Well, at the rate he's writing, it should be next week sometime. So, in general, what we want to encourage you to do is to play with language and to make it your own. Language is about communication, and you are building this connection with your readers, but the glory of something like a novel versus something like flash fiction is that you can change what these words mean. You can nudge them this way and that in order to give context to your readers and really have them connect with the story even when they're not reading it at that moment.
It's all about putting everything in the right context. It's about setting it up correctly and then paying it off and making sure you're following through with all these threads that you're trying to weave. And yes, it can be work, but you wouldn't do it if you didn't love it at least a little bit. And you should try to love language overall. And part of that is having fun with it. Play as much as you can, as much as will fit within your story that makes sense. And, reformat your readers' brains. And you do that when you
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.